the Sports Renegades podcast on SportstownChicago.com.
Only the Bulls, only the Bulls, only the one and only Chicago Bulls. Who can set the court on fire? Only the Bulls.
All right, welcome back to the Sports Renegades here on SportstownChicago.com. I'm Ryan Stuprich.
And I'm Ryan Risky, and on the SportstownChicago.com hotline, we have my friend Bhav, who's here to talk about the Bulls. What's going on, Bhav?
Hey guys, how are you guys doing today?
Pretty well.
Doing
Still
good.
kind of trying to process the Bulls news today of firing head coach Tom Thibodeau. What was your reaction to that?
Well, first off, I first thought that okay, well, this was kind of a coming because the entire season we knew there was a chance that Tibbs will be gone sooner rather than later, and then the closer and closer, we headed into the off season, the more and more it became clear that okay, he's either going to get fired or they will somehow, some way find a way to trade him, but that did not happen. Now he is not the head coach of the Chicago Bulls. And now we have to now we have to start a new era, really.
Right, and they fired their assistant coach, too. I was kind of disappointed by the news because I was just kind of thinking, because, I mean, obviously you knew that he didn't like the front office and Gar Forman and John Paxson didn't like Thibodeau, except the only problem is when you look at the list of the head coaching candidates to fill their vacancy, it's really not a good list, and it's a list that makes you cringe when you think that Fred Hoiberg is the number one guy.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah, really quickly to add to that, my fear really with this Fred Hoiberg thing is I just hope this is not a second coming of Tim Floyd, if you know what I'm saying here.
Right. Exactly. I feel like it's setting up to be just like that, too.
I mean, just think about this in context. Not to say Tom Thibodeau is Phil Jackson or anything, but he's the second best coach in Bulls history.
Mm-hmm.
We just released him, and now we're going to settle in for another Iowa State coach. And no knock on Fred Hoiberg, he's a good coach, but I don't know. I'm kind of skeptical about his success in the NBA, especially with the Bulls. And we have to realize the Bulls are not a rebuilding team. They're a team that has some proud veterans, and if they just rebuild, get some pieces here and there, try to get a little bit young, and they can just be a little bit more innovative on offense. This team, I think they could still win. It's kind of hard right now because when you have a guy like LeBron who's now dominated this Eastern Conference for 5 straight years, you just have to wonder, will they ever get past him? And that's really the issue.
Right. And the one thing I disagree with your saying is I personally don't think Fred Hoiberg is a good coach. I mean, his 3 seed lost to a 14 seed in the NCAA.
He's a good
tournament.
college coach, I think.
See, that's the thing. I don't think college coaches usually translate to the NBA.
Normally it doesn't. We saw that with Rick Pitino and a couple other people who tried to coach in the NBA, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah, and the last thing you want is a Mark Trestman-like situation with the Bulls, where they let go of a pretty good coach. Unfortunately, he couldn't make an adjustment, and then they go on to another coach who just failed in all proportions. And now you're in another mess, and now you're a few years behind than usual. And I know NFL is different from NBA, but nonetheless, it's you want to make a nice transition. Ideally, you want to do what Golden State just did with letting go of Mark Jackson and getting Steve Kerr. If we can get our Steve Kerr, quote unquote, then we'll be in a pretty good position, and then we'll look back at this decision and be like, okay, yeah, that was the right move. But looking at Fred Hoiberg right now, it really, as Ryan said, it really makes me cringe because we just fired one of the best coaches in the NBA.
Right.
Now we're going for college.
It almost makes you wish that they fired Thibodeau a year early so that they could hire Steve Kerr.
Yeah. That would have also been totally acceptable because then it'll be like, okay, Steve Kerr, he's a new mind and a pretty exciting mind. But nonetheless, we'll see what the Bulls management do. But I will really quickly add this. think about it, this will be John Paxson's, I believe, fourth coaching hire as a GM.
Actually, this will be his
VP.
fifth. I think I read they fired 4 coaches.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Then at some point, I mean, I couldn't hear this from any other sports station, but at some point, can you just look at John Paxson just as a VP/GM and wonder, is he also kind of an issue for this basketball team? Because it always turns out that he has this problem with some coach.
I think the problem with that is Jerry Reinsdorf likes him too much, and of course he won 3 championships with the Bulls, and he's sort of part of that Bulls family. I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon unless he leaves on his own terms. The thing that scares me, just to go back to the coaching really quick, is if the Cavaliers lose or win the NBA Finals, I mean, there's a lot of talk that their coach David Blatt will be gone. And then that leaves Tom Thibodeau open to possibly coach the Cavaliers within their own division and coaching LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Love, and that's kind of a scary thought too.
Yeah.
It is, and I know when I was talking with Ryan about head coaching vacancies and all the candidates, one name, that really good name that pops up is Monty Williams, who was fired by the Pelicans, who did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, he improved every year.
Yeah, and he's not even on their head coaching vacancy list.
Yeah, I was just gonna get to that. Monty Williams, he's another really good basketball mind. I personally wouldn't mind him as the next head coach. He would certainly be on that list. Him, and then of course Mark Jackson. I would also contact him, ask him if he's interested in getting back to coaching. But the fact that right now, today, I was watching the press conference. It just seems like Gar Forman and John Paxson have already kind of made that decision in their head that, we're gonna give this job to Fred Hoiberg, and we're not gonna give anybody else a chance. And if they go with that approach, and if it turns out to be the worst, then I sincerely believe both Foreman and Paxson need to be fired.
Yeah, again, we're talking the Bulls and the decision to fire Tom Thibodeau with my friend Anna Bhav. And I saw a tweet from Nick Friedel that said the main thing that you got from that press conference was that Gar and Paxson didn't like Thibodeau, and Thibodeau didn't like Gar and Paxson.
Yeah. It was the relationship between management and Tibbs. It was really bad. It was actually worse than really what I thought. I thought maybe it's just a little bit difference of some philosophy, minutes, and just things like that. But the more that I read one of Nick Friedel's articles where he pointed out some specific events of how it really got worse. And the more I looked back, I was like, wow, those were just some building blocks of what really the relationship is or was at this point. And that's the one thing I always I have to look into, really specifically John Paxson, is how sometimes Paxson, I feel kind of plays in his nose a little bit in the coaches in the coaching job and coaching duties, when really he should be just overseeing the player personnel and not worrying too much about how the coach does it. Now, if they use the reason that we'll talk to our medical staff, and that's how we got to this decision of minutes restriction. I don't know how much I could really believe in that, because if they're using that as kind of their tool to just tell him, then that's a separate issue. Then Gar and Pax are fine in that regard. But if that turns out to be a little bit false, which I don't think it is, but say if that's the case, then you have to kind of point the finger a little bit at the management.
Now, let's say that, maybe the next head coaching candidate who they hire probably won't work out. That's just my opinion, that it probably won't, just judging by the candidates to fill this vacancy.
Right.
Do you think that then Jerry Reinsdorf will look to fire John Paxson or Gar Forman? Because obviously, if you look at it, they said that, we didn't win a championship. That was one of the reasons Thibodeau was fired. Well, they probably should have looked at the fact that they didn't give him a championship roster other than this year. And the years without Derrick Rose, everyone knew they weren't going to win.
Right.
So, to answer your question, if this next coaching, if this does not work out, and if should Garden Pax be canned, I think that should be the logical step. And if I know Jay Reisdorf is always known to be really loyal, and if he's really, really loyal to John Paxson, maybe like create like a different position for Paxson where he has no say on the player personnel, and then getting rid of Gar Forman and getting a new GM. Because if you're this loyal to a guy, and yeah, he's made mistakes and everything, you have to make a tough call. And unfortunately, with Jay Reisdorf, that's one of his big flaws of his ownership, is that his loyalty to like really makes fans like us question why is this organization still stuck in a particular position. So with that being said, you have two options with Pax: let him go, or if you really, really love him, put him in a different position that will not make him that won't allow him to make any player decision. And Foreman, obviously, you can fire him for that one.
Right, and the interesting thing that'll be that we'll want to pay attention to is if John Paxson gets into a feud with this next head coach, because the past two coaches, Vinny Del Negro and Tom Thibodeau, he's gotten into big fights with. If you remember, with Del Negro, he barged into his office and grabbed Del Negro by the tie and started screaming at him.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll be interesting to pay attention to if he has a feud with their next head coach, because, after Del Negro, you're thinking, okay, it's probably Del Negro did something that pissed off Paxson. Now it gets to Thibodeau, they get into a fight. It's like, okay, well, it might be Thibodeau's attitude. So thinking about it, that's two straight head coaches that John Paxson's gotten into a feud with. And if it happens with a third coach, you might kind of realize it's probably John Paxson that's the problem.
Exactly, and this time you really just cannot turn a blind eye to these things. You have to really you have to really keep a close eye, because it's been 17 years since the Bulls last won their championship.
Yeah.
Okay, it's been 17 years. Every Bulls fan post Jordan era is waiting for a championship, and personally, to me, this Thibs era, it's I'm not going to label it as a failure or anything, because I think Thibs has done a wonderful job for the most part.
He has. If you think about it, this is the best run of success they've had since the Phil Jackson era, and you could probably argue
for sure.
It's the second best era of Bulls basketball. And if it wasn't for a Rose injury, they probably, if Rose doesn't blow out his ACL, there's a really good chance that they would have won a championship in one of those 5 years.
They would have beaten the Mavericks in 2011, no question.
If they'd gotten by Miami. I think they would have won it in the lockout season or the year after, had a Rose not blown out one of his knees.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just as I was really thinking about this more on Tuesday, that as I was watching the Cleveland Cavaliers unfortunately celebrate, I was thinking that, okay, few things that I took away from this little LeBron James run. One, this wouldn't have happened if Rose hadn't, if Rose injury, hadn't take place. I think in 2012 they would have had a pretty good shot at getting past Miami.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the injuries happened. So now with the injury, that injury kind of shut our title window for about a year, maybe 2 years, one can argue. And then this year, we had a really good shot. I was just stunned while I was watching Game 6 that why did they stop playing Bulls basketball? How did this team turn into the New York Knicks?
Yeah, the defensive meltdown was unbelievable. It was unbelievable how many defensive meltdowns they had this year. My personal opinion is, if instead of the Rose of this year, this was the Rose that'll play next year, I think they would have gotten by Cleveland. Just because I think he's going to play at an elite level next year, since he finally has a full season under his belt after missing 2 seasons. He's going to have an entire offseason to rest, and he could be back to being, maybe somewhat close to what he was his MVP year.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's same. And now my only hope is really, one, they actually nail the whole coaching search and get the right coach. But I don't know, I'm feeling already skeptical, because if they're just chanting Fred Hoiberg and Advocate Center right now, then I am seriously cringing.